Long before GPS satellites blinked from the black vault of space, before compass needles twitched with magnetic certainty, and long before paper maps inked the veins of continents, there were people who read the land with their feet, the sky with their eyes, and memory with their blood. To the desert nomads, direction was not given, it was known. It lived in the ribs, behind the eyes, under the tongue. It was a song sung to the stars and a whisper passed down at the fireside. This 13th segment follows the invisible roads, etched across the great deserts, not by machines, but by wind, instinct, tradition, and celestial rhythm. Navigation, in the world of the nomads, was not merely movement. It was an inheritance, and those who knew how to travel, truly travel, were part cartographer, part philosopher, and part poet. Tonight, we follow the compass of the wind and starlight. Through dunes, over steppe, into legend. The desert has no signs, but it speaks to those uninitiated. The desert appears shapeless. It shifts and slides, conceals and transforms. It offers no street signs or road markers. But to the practiced, nomadic eye, the land is never blank. The pattern of rippling sand can reveal the time since the last wind. A line of acacia trees hints at an underground water vein. A distant shimmer might betray an animal trail or the ghost of an old caravan path. The desert speaks in shade, in scent, in echo. The Bedouin read the wind, not just its direction, but its flavor, its urgency. They named the types of winds, each with character. The Sharqi, dry and fierce. The Simum, hot and dangerous. The Bark, sudden and sharp. Each carried memory. Each told stories. And they listened. Caravans and memory routes, though maps were rare and paper scarce, nomadic caravans developed mental maps more accurate than ink. These memory maps were sung, spoken, rehearsed with each journey. One might hear a line like, 3 days past the Twin Rocks, veer east by the broken well where the vultures circle, sleep there and greet the jackal who guards the route. 2. The untrained ear, its poetry, but to the desert-born, its instruction. Markers were not drawn but lived, trees, hills, ruins, skeletons of lost wagons. Each generation repeated the journey, refining the tale. The path, once learned, was carried in the mind and passed from parent to child. Some Berber tribes in North Africa carried long oral geographies, poems that mapped not only distance but mood, a hard day's walk, a thirsty wind, a cool shadow under thorn. The stars as teachers when the sand erases the footprints of yesterday, and the sun leaves no trace of north or south. It is to the stars the nomad turns. Every civilization has looked up in awe, but for the nomads, stargazing was not a hobby, it was survival. The night sky was a map written in firelight. The North Star, always steadfast, anchored journeys. Constellations were not abstract but intimate. Camels in the sky, scorpions guarding routes, warrior figures leading the way. Among the Tuareg, children were taught to read the stars before they could herd goats. They learned that certain stars rose at particular times of year, aligning with migrations, grazing, and trade. Stars predicted rain. Stars warned of sandstorms. And stars, above all, reminded the traveler of their place. In the vastness in Mongolia, it was said that the stars themselves followed the riders, keeping watch. Even the fading moon was consulted, its curve, its color, its speed. Instruments of the invisible despite relying primarily on nature and memory, nomadic civilizations were not without tools. The astrolabe, borrowed and refined by Arab scholars, allowed them to measure celestial positions with astonishing accuracy. The kamal, a simple wooden board used with string, could determine latitude by the height of the North Star. Yet, most often, it was the body itself that was used, the pace of a camel, the rhythm of footsteps, the swelling of one's own shadow. Tuareg Men were known to place a stick in the sand at sunset, watching how the shadow lengthened and turned. From this alone, they could calculate direction. They counted breaths between water stops. They tasted the dust. Instinct passed down. What we call instinct today was once skill. Nomadic peoples refined the art of orientation through centuries of intimate engagement with the earth. One could smell the wind and name its origin. One could touch sand and guess the time. One could hear the flapping of a bird's wings and know which direction it flew from. These skills weren't mystical, they were taught. But they required presence, slowness, silence. A desert traveler could sit for an hour before deciding which way to go. Haste was dangerous. Listening was sacred. Guides and guardians, not everyone could be a guide. In many nomadic cultures, the role of navigator was revered. These were often elder members, chosen for their memory, calm, and wisdom. They were storytellers as much as scouts, carrying in their heads the shape of distant lands and the signs of shifting sands. Some guides were thought to be protected by spirits or blessed by ancestors. To betray the route or lead falsely was not only a failure, it was a crime against the community that in the Kazakh steppes. Eagle hunters could travel by the stars and scent alone, blindfolded, led only by the feel of the land beneath their horses. The inner compass at the heart of all navigation, beyond stars, winds, and dunes, was a deeper sense, an inner compass shaped by tradition and trust. Nomads often spoke of knowing without seeing, of feeling the correct path. It came from repetition, from being raised in motion, from carrying the desert inside. A Tuareg proverb says, "The desert does not change, only our memory fades." And so, to preserve memory was to preserve direction. Sleep beneath the guiding sky. Now, as your breath slows and the sky outside your window darkens, imagine you lie beneath the open stars of the Sahara or the silent night of the Gobi. A soft wind brushes over the dunes. Somewhere, a camel sighs. And overhead, the stars begin their slow dance. You do not need to know where you are. The sky remembers. The sand forgives. The wind will tell you stories if you are quiet enough to listen. Let yourself drift now, guided not by roads, but by memory and peace. Amidst the undulating dunes and the ever-moving rhythm of wind and hoof, beauty persists, not in marble columns or stained-glass cathedrals, but in thread, in stitch, in cloth that breathes the memory of hands. To the sedentary, art is fixed, hung on a wall, frozen in paint. But to the nomad, beauty must move. It must roll, fold, shelter, carry, and endure the wear of the world. In this 12th chapter, we trace the tactile legacy of the desert peoples, not in stone, but in the warp and weft of fabric. We study the history of textiles and patterns made not for gallery display but for tents, saddles, robes, and rugs. In every color, symbol, and motif lies a story, a memory of mountain and steppe, of wedding and war, of clan and cosmos. Let us unfold the ancient tapestries of nomadic civilizations and listen to the hush of woven history. Portable palaces. The tent as textile masterpiece. The nomad's home is not nailed to the earth. It breathes with the seasons, collapses into bundles, and rises again like a well-trained animal. But its structure, particularly among the Bedouin, Mongols, and Central Asian tribes, is not merely functional. It is an artwork, the black goat hair. Tents of the Bedouins, stitched by women over months, provide shelter from desert winds and shade from the scorching sun. The very fabric repels rain and insulates warmth, but also carries heritage. Patterns are woven into side panels, marking family lines, tribal affiliations, and even marital status. Mongol yurts, or jairs, are encircled by richly embroidered bands known as hishigs, each color and design heavy with symbolic meaning. A tent wall, to the untrained eye, may be mere decoration. To the initiated, It's a narrative of the cosmos, guardians, blessings, and ancestral echoes, woven roads. The rug is memory if you were to gather the most intimate history of a desert family. You would not find it in journals, but under their feet. The rug, knotted by hand, thread by patient thread, is not merely flooring. It is a family archive, a religious altar, a canvas of coded dreams. Among Persian nomads, the Gaba rug stands as a masterpiece of minimalist storytelling. Rough, thick, and free form, these rugs feature abstract motifs. A tree here, a lone animal there, a series of diamonds like the eyes of ancestors watching. Each shape is specific to a tribe, a region, a weaver. Turkmen and Baluchi nomads created deeper, more geometric designs, often in red and indigo. Rugs serve dowries, births, funerals, and gifts for guests. A carpet might take months or years to complete, and though meant to be walked on, each footfall would echo with the legacy of labor and love, threads of identity, robes, turbans, and scarves. Clothing in nomadic society is never merely for warmth or modesty. It is armor, ceremony, signal. Consider the deep indigo robes of the Tuareg men, dyed until their skin takes on the blue stain. To outsiders, they are the blue people of the Sahara. To themselves, the color is power, a nod to sky and spirit. The Bedouin woman's red-stitched dress, embroidered with cross-stitched diamonds and stylized birds, is not random. Each mark identifies her tribe, her marital status, even her dowry. The abaya, while flowing and dark, might conceal intricately beaded cuffs, or a lining only visible when twirling in dance. Turbans are maps. The way they are wrapped, their length, their stripe pattern, all matter. In the steppes of Central Asia, chasuble-style coats are richly brocaded with thread of gold for weddings and honored guests. Even the bags used to carry grain or salt are adorned, because beauty, for the nomad, is never wasted. Symbolism in stitch. What meanings rest in a triangle, a spiral, a zigzag? Among Turkic weavers, the triangle represents protection, a mountain that guards, a row of connected diamonds, a family. Spirals may signal water or wind, both sacred and scarce. In Baluchi rugs, repeating hooked motifs act as wards against the evil eye. In Persian tribal weaving, abstract goats and camels reflect economic life, while stylized birds might hint at a daughter given in marriage. These are not random decorations. They are language without letters, portable libraries that speak through motif and hue. Dyeing under open skies, desert dyes are drawn from nature, coaxed from root, bark, beetle, and flower. The bright reds come from madder, blues from indigo, golden hues from saffron or pomegranate rinds. The process is laborious, soaking, boiling, fermenting, but deeply respected. Mongol dyers worked with tannins and minerals. Tuareg artisans favored natural indigo, oxidized under the sun. To create a single robe of enduring color might take weeks, but its depth would last lifetimes. A dyed thread was not just thread. It was sun, water, patience, and story. Hands that. Remember, most nomadic textiles are made by women. From childhood, girls watch their mothers spin wool, plant warp threads, knot, count, sing. The skill is not taught so much as absorbed. Like a language, weavers sing while they work, not just to pass time, but to measure rhythm and maintain spirit. Some textiles are never sold. They are part of the woman's dowry, a representation of her endurance, creativity, and strength. Older weavers are known to recognize the work of their kin by a single knot, a certain curve in a diamond, a choice of border color. In this world, hand and heart are indistinguishable. A heritage woven onward today. Many nomadic communities are semi-settled, and their textile traditions are under threat from factory production and modern commerce. Yet in villages across the Caucasus, the Zagros Mountains, and the Kazakh steppe, the looms still creak. Workshops pass down designs, and new generations begin to blend ancient motifs with modern needs. Some rugs now carry QR codes or are sold with oral recordings of the weaver's voice. But the soul remains, the belief that cloth is not passive. It protects. It remembers. It whispers. As sleep threads near. As your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts tangle like yarn before the loom, imagine a desert tent glowing softly from within. On its floor lies a rug, freshly woven, its patterns echoing stars above. A woman leans over her work, humming low, the warp threads vibrating with life. The wind outside stirs gently, lifting the edge of the cloth. It carries dust, memory, and the scent of wool warmed by sun. Somewhere, an old song drifts from tent to tent. Sleep now, wrapped in patterns older than time. In the quiet hours of desert dusk, when the sun's burn has softened into amber and the wind hums over the dunes like an ancient lullaby, hands begin to work in rhythm with memory. Under goat hair tents, beside camel saddles and flickering hearths, the art of weaving unfolds, steady, silent, essential. In this 10th segment, we turn our attention to one of the most enduring yet understated forms of human creativity, the woven threads of nomadic life. Here, in this contemplative corner of desert history, we explore the world of looms that traveled, patterns passed through generations, and the fabrics that clothed not only bodies, but entire ways of life. Textiles were not merely garments. They were identity, economy, protection, and prayer. The portable loom and the traveling artisan, unlike the sedentary cultures that fixed their looms to workshop floors, desert weavers worked in a manner as mobile as their lives. The looms of nomadic peoples were light, often horizontal, strung between stakes on the sand or wooden posts under tents. A few sticks, a keen eye, and time. That was all it took to begin conjuring cloth from fiber. The Berbers, Tuareg, Mongols, and Bedouin all had variations on this simple technology. The horizontal ground loom was easy to dismantle, roll up, and carry with the caravan. It was not a burden, it was a companion. As the camel bore water and grain, the loom bore memory and skill. Children learned by watching. Elder women, often the guardians of pattern and form, dictated the color schemes and meanings behind the lines. Men, in some cultures, wove saddlebags and belts. In others, textile work was wholly the domain of women who passed designs down like lullabies. Wool from the herd, dye from the land. The raw materials for desert textiles came from the herd and the horizon. Sheep and goats provided wool. Camels, too, gave coarse but durable fibers. The yarn was spun by hand, using spindles that could fit into a pouch or be tied to a belt. The colors of desert textiles echoed the land itself. Ochres, reds, blues, and earthy browns. Indigo, harvested and fermented through long, aromatic processes, was particularly prized. It was not only a dye but a charm, believed to ward off evil, enhance fertility, and honor ancestors. Red came from madder root, and yellows from desert flowers. Some weavers used ash and iron to create deeper hues. The process was alchemical, slow, and full of intuition. A slightly longer soak, a hotter sun, a different clay vessel. Any could shift the final result. Patterns with purpose. The geometry of nomadic textiles was not random. Every zigzag, chevron, and diamond had a name, a meaning, a memory. In Berber weaving, the lozenge often represented a woman or the womb. Repeating triangles could suggest mountains, water, or kinship ties. In Central Asian felt work, swirling motifs echoed the whirls of horns or the spiral of wind. These patterns were often not written down, but embedded in muscle memory. A weaver might not articulate what a motif meant, but she would never forget how to form it. Some rugs and bands served ceremonial functions, laid beneath newlyweds, used to wrap infants, or draped over sacred objects. Others were strictly practical, saddle blankets, water bag holders, or wall partitions, but all were beautiful. Beauty was not separate from utility. It was intertwined. The tent as a woven world, perhaps the greatest textile of nomadic life, was the tent itself. Woven from black goat hair in regions like Arabia or from thick felts in Central Asia, the tent was not just shelter, it was cosmos. The yurt of the Mongols and Turkic tribes was a marvel of insulation and simplicity. Its outer felt was made by beating and rolling wool into dense sheets, while the wooden frame folded like a flower when dismantled. Inside, felt rugs and embroidered hangings defined space, told stories, and comforted against the cold that in Bedouin. Encampments, the Beit al-Shayar, the House of Hair, shimmered with animal oils and age. Its fibers swelled when wet, keeping rain out, and breathed in heat, allowing for ventilation. To step into such a home was to step into centuries of craft, into a sanctuary that folded space, wind, and color together, trade, tribute, and textile. Economy desert textiles were not only for personal use, they were traded, gifted, and used as currency. Tuareg indigo turbans, deep blue and fragrant, became symbols of status and mystique. Berber carpets traveled from Atlas villages to Mediterranean ports. Central Asian felts were prized along the Silk Road for their warmth and artistry. In markets like Aleppo, Samarkand, or Marrakesh, nomadic weavings hung beside spices and silks, their coarse textures belying the care in their making. Kings and sultans collected them. Monasteries and mosques were adorned with them. Yet the weavers themselves remained mostly unnamed. Their legacy was silent, carried in warp and weft. Silence, rhythm, and memory. To weave in the desert was often a quiet act. The thump of the shuttle, the pull of the yarn, the brushing of sand off the fibers. These were the sounds that accompanied life's waiting moments. Women wove between tasks, in the cool of the evening, or beside fires as stories were told. The act itself was meditative, even sacred. It allowed one to mark time not in hours, but in patterns. A band of red might recall a good year. A line of broken chevrons might whisper of a journey's danger. The loom is legacy in a world without permanence, where homes moved, routes shifted, and empires came and went. The textile endured. Rugs lasted longer than rulers. A girl's dowry blanket could warm her grandchildren. A dyed sash might survive even as names were forgotten. The loom, humble and portable, became a silent keeper of culture. It carried no signature, no date, no proclamation. But it carried meaning. As your eyes begin to soften into sleep, picture the loom under starlight. Feel the scratch of wool, the softness of dyed fibers, the hush of hands at work. Imagine the line being drawn, thread by thread, across time, not to bind, but to connect. Here, in the hush between dunes, culture is not written. It is woven. Wherever the desert stretched wide and empty, the oasis stood as its quiet contradiction, a place not merely of survival, but of mystery, of abundance, and of human congregation. In the minds of those who wandered arid lands, the oasis was more than a rest stop. It was a symbol of divine favor, a whispered promise in the language of wind and thirst. In this ninth segment, we descend into the green hearts of deserts, the oases. We will sit beneath palm canopies where shade dapples still water, explore how these havens shape trade, life, and imagination, and marvel at how, in lands of endless sand, people carved out small Edens through patience, engineering, and trust. In the earth's deep reservoirs, the oasis as a miracle. The word itself, oasis, conjures something dreamlike. A ring of palm trees rising out of endless dunes. The sound of trickling water in a land known only for silence. For many nomadic peoples, encountering an oasis was not merely a relief, but a kind of spiritual revelation. To find water where none should be was a gift that inspired stories, rituals, and settlements. Most oases were fed by underground aquifers, ancient water held in porous rock for millennia, or by intermittent springs released by tectonic pressure. Over time, nomadic groups learned where these hidden reservoirs lay, how to read the patterns of birds, how to interpret the soil and wind, and eventually how to tap them. Some oases were vast, supporting towns and date plantations. Others were no more than a shaded well and a few shrubs, but each served a purpose. Each reminded the desert wanderer that life could erupt even where the earth whispered otherwise. Engineering the bloom from the Sahara to the Gobi, from the Negev to the deserts of Persia, humans engineered the landscape not by building upward, but by digging down. In Persia, the ingenious Kanat system, gently sloping underground channels that brought water from deep aquifers to surface farms, created oases where there had been only rock. The Berbers developed fagaras and similar systems dotted deserts across Central Asia. These weren't short-term projects, but multi-generational investments in sustainability and survival. Oases were not passive gifts. They were maintained, cultivated, and expanded with laborious effort. Tunnels had to be cleared. Palm trees required trimming. Water was shared according to intricate schedules and communal law. A breach of water etiquette could lead to blood feuds. So sacred was the resource. The palm's kingdom. At the heart of most oases stood the date palm, the tree of life in many desert cultures. Its fruits offered vital sugar and nutrients. Its fronds could be used for weaving mats, baskets, even shade structures. Its trunk, though not always used for timber, was symbolic, vertical, and enduring. Oasis farming often operated in layers. Tall palms formed the upper canopy, beneath which grew fruit trees like pomegranates or figs, and beneath those, herbs and vegetables. This vertical stratification was a form of desert permaculture, maximizing yield while conserving moisture and shielding more delicate plants from sun and wind. The sight of such tiered greenery, rising from orange sand, was a kind of visual poetry. Nature organized by human knowledge into balance and beauty. Life at the water's edge oases served not just as agricultural centers, but as social nodes in the vast network of desert routes. Caravans carrying salt, spices, textiles, and stories would converge upon these greenway stations. Some oases became full-fledged cities. Think of Timbuktu, once nestled at the edge of the Sahara, or Palmyra, a fabled oasis of the Syrian desert. Others remained smaller, a cluster of adobe homes, a mosque, a shaded market. Here, languages mixed. A Berber trader might speak with a Tuareg herder, an Arab merchant with a Persian scholar. Information flowed with the water. News from empires, rumors of conflict, medical remedies, marriage proposals, all passed through the palms, sacred pools and stories. Many oases took on religious or mythic significance. A spring might be associated with a saint, a prophet, or a legendary animal. Certain trees were considered sacred, never to be cut. Inscriptions carved into nearby rocks told of past arrivals, lovers' initials, poetry etched by forgotten hands. There were rituals performed before entering an oasis. Some tribes observed silence for a moment in gratitude. Others washed their hands in a particular way or made offerings of dates. Dreams about oases were taken seriously. To dream of a well was often interpreted as a sign of spiritual renewal or the arrival of good fortune. Balance and fragility, but as abundant as they seemed, oases were always fragile, vulnerable to overuse, political conflict, or climate shifts. Mismanagement of water led to salinization of the soil. Drought could shrink a lush area to a barren one within a generation. Invasions often targeted oases, understanding that to control water was to control people. Yet in the face of all this, many survived. Even today, modern technologies, solar-powered pumps, drip irrigation, are being employed to revive and preserve oases. Some villages have remained continuously inhabited for thousands of years, their rhythms guided still by the pull of water beneath the earth. The dream of the oasis, there is a deeper symbolism to the oasis that goes beyond agriculture or geography. For desert cultures, it is hope incarnate, a green circle in a sea of barrenness, a reprieve earned by endurance, and a promise kept by the earth itself that it teaches patience. It teaches trust in what lies unseen, beneath, within, and beyond. As the stars appear above your resting thoughts tonight, imagine the hush of palms swaying in a wind that carries no dust. Hear the slow drip of water into a clay basin. Feel the temperature drop and the stillness grow. You are in a place that remembers every footprint, every whisper, every need quenched. This is the gift of the oasis. A bloom not in defiance of the desert, but in harmony with its quiet, eternal song. The desert speaks in quiet rhythms, and those who dwell within its sands learn to echo its forms, not through speech alone, but through the brush, the thread, and the weaving hand. In the great expanse of arid silence, nomadic civilizations found beauty not in grand architecture or sculpted cities, but in movement, repetition, and the ornamentation of the everyday. Where others built monuments, they embroidered stories. Where others painted murals, they wove messages into carpets. Their art was portable, symbolic, and alive with meaning. In this segment, we drift into the colorful, tactile world of nomadic aesthetics, where a tint's lining might tell a lineage, where a saddlebag could reveal a tribe's spiritual compass, and where even the stitching of a cloak might mark love, mourning, or protection. A world without walls. Unlike sedentary civilizations that left their marks in stone, nomadic peoples created within the bounds of necessity. Their canvas was fabric, their brush a bone needle, their ink dyed thread and sun-baked pigment. They traveled too often to be burdened with monuments, and so they invested their creativity in the things they could carry: carpets, blankets, tunics, belts, water skins, camel adornments. All could be vehicles of artistic expression. These were not idle decorations. They were the scrolls of the steppe and the parchments of the sand. Textiles as memory among nomadic cultures, particularly the Tuareg of the Sahara, the Kazakhs of Central Asia, and the Bedouin of the Arabian Peninsula. Textiles often served as living histories. A woven rug might carry geometric patterns unique to one family, passed down through generations. The colors chosen were rarely random: red for vitality, blue for protection, black for resilience, white for peace. Motifs repeated themselves in mysterious rhythms: diamonds, zigzags, stars, eyes, each with its own resonance. A single tapestry could be read like a silent script, its coded language known to those within the culture, indecipherable to outsiders. Just as a bard might pass along epic poems, a mother might pass along a symbol-laden cloak, instructing her daughter in each stitch's meaning. The camp as a moving gallery. A nomadic camp, though temporary, was no less curated than a palace. The central tent, often the dwelling of the matriarch, was richly decorated with hand-woven panels, tassels, and amulets. The colors brightened the neutral landscape, a burst of personality against the golden sand or the muted steppes. The tent poles were sometimes painted or wrapped in textiles. Camel saddles bore ornate carvings. Even cooking tools were etched with patterns. These aesthetic choices weren't just for beauty. They invited protection, repelled evil spirits, and reminded the family of ancestral unity. The women's workshop. In many nomadic societies, women were the principal artists. Their looms were as revered as books, and their role as preservers of cultural language was central. Weaving and embroidery were taught from a young age, often beginning with small decorative items before progressing to major pieces such as rugs and dowry blankets. Textile work was rhythmic and meditative. The repetition of pattern was a kind of storytelling. There were long periods of silence, the thread sliding through wool, the hum of wind against the tent, the quiet of concentration. But sometimes songs accompanied the work or stories were told while fingers moved, linking the act of creation to memory and myth. Dyes from the desert color was not easy to come by. Nomads often had to extract dyes from what was available: crushed insects, desert plants, minerals, even rust. The deep blue of indigo was particularly prized and labor-intensive. Red might come from madder root, yellows from pomegranate rind or desert flowers. Black was often soot-based, while white might be achieved with lime or chalk. Each dye had to be prepared carefully, set with natural mordants such as ash, salt, or fermented camel urine. The resulting hues were never loud, but they were honest, earthy, and full of subtle emotion. Patterns of protection. Just as architecture can be defensive, so too could art. Many patterns and amulets woven into tents or clothing served a protective purpose. The evil eye symbol, variations of stars, or sharply angled lines were believed to confuse malevolent spirits. Beads might be sewn into hems, bells attached to belts to ward off bad luck. Some designs were believed to guide travelers through the desert, invoking direction and balance. Others mimicked constellations, echoing the maps nomads read in the sky. Art in motion. The beauty of nomadic art was its adaptability. A design might appear on a rug one year, a water bag the next. Patterns evolved through migration, absorbing ideas from other tribes or traders. Yet, in all its transformation, there remained a consistent grammar of form. A shared visual language passed silently across deserts and steppes, and when conflict, weather, or need forced a tribe to move, they did not leave behind ruins or shrines. They rolled up their art, folded their tapestries, packed their painted tools, and walked forward, carrying their museum of the self with them. Today's echoes, though many nomadic cultures have settled or been displaced by modernity, their artistic traditions continue. In marketplaces across Central Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East, one still finds carpets, garments, and jewelry bearing ancient motifs. Collectors marvel at their intricacy, yet often miss the depth of what's encoded. For in these pieces lie not only designs, but memories, births, travels, rituals, ancestors. And in some places, the traditions are being revived. Young women learning their grandmother's stitch, young men tracing the carved lines of an old camel saddle, artists blending the ancient with the new in ways that keep the heartbeat of the desert alive. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine a quiet tent lit by oil lamp, the hush of wool brushing wool, a loom clicking gently, a girl learning from her grandmother, not through words, but through thread. And know that in the vastness of the world's most barren places, beauty blooms, not in monuments, but in patterns carried close to the heart. Beneath the harsh sun and shifting dunes of the world's great deserts, the mind might conjure silence, a silence of the mind, of empty horizons, of forgotten histories. And yet, like cool water in a shaded basin, knowledge often pulled in the most unlikely places. Far from the crowded cities of stone, far from palaces and courts, there were quiet centers of learning, libraries in the sands, where parchment met patience, and words rippled like mirages across time. This is a journey into the intellectual heartbeat of the desert, a story of scrolls wrapped in goat hide, of scholars who carried wisdom as their only possession, and of communities who preserved books as sacred relics. Even as they wandered through the windswept vastness of Earth's hottest places, let us now move slowly, gently, into this almost invisible world, the world of desert knowledge. Timbuktu, the star library of the Sahara. Few names stir the imagination like Timbuktu, a place once whispered in Europe as a symbol of unreachable mystery. But in truth, This desert town in Mali was a beacon of scholarship during the golden age of trans-Saharan trade, in the 14th and 15th centuries, when caravans by the hundreds arrived with salt, gold, and slaves. They also brought ideas, philosophical tracts from Cairo, religious texts from Mecca, legal treatises from Andalusia. And in return, Timbuktu offered its own scholars, poets, and jurists trained in the desert's unique schools. At its peak, the city hosted over 25,000 students and boasted several public and private libraries, many held in mud-brick homes. Some of these texts, written in Arabic and African languages using Arabic script, dealt not only with theology, but with astronomy, medicine, ethics, agriculture, and mathematics. The manuscripts were often carefully wrapped in dyed leather or stored in carved wooden chests, protected against sand and insects. Their pages were adorned with calligraphy so elegant, it seemed to float off the parchment. Marginal notes sometimes overflowed, conversations across generations crammed into the sides of pages, a kind of quiet dialogue over centuries. The caravan of teachers, unlike formal institutions of the cities, learning in nomadic societies was often informal, but no less rigorous. Teachers would travel alongside caravans, setting up temporary study circles beneath palm trees in oases or inside tents at night. A teacher might carry only a small satchel of books and scrolls, yet in that satchel was a portable university. Students, young men and sometimes women, memorized religious texts, poetry, legal arguments, and genealogies. They might spend weeks on a single phrase, debating its nuances by firelight. These roving scholars were honored, offered hospitality, and sometimes paid not in coin but in food, camels, or safe passage across tribal territories. Paper and the problem of preservation. One might wonder, how does paper survive in the desert? In truth, it often doesn't, unless guarded with obsessive care. The dry climate helped, as did the habit of wrapping pages in animal skins or layering them between palm leaves. Special rooms were built slightly underground to keep manuscripts cool. Some families passed down secret formulas for ink that resisted fading. Desert ink was often made from soot, acacia gum, and water, and could last centuries. Red pigments might be derived from pomegranate rind or crushed stone, and gold leaf was rarely used, not for lack of gold, but because the spirit of desert scholarship prized clarity over glamour, books as status and spiritual wealth in many Saharan and Arabian cultures. Owning a book was like owning a relic. Wealthy families would commission copies of famous texts from traveling scribes. A well-written manuscript, complete with marginal commentary and stamped ownership seal, was a source of pride. Some nomadic tribes even included books in dowries or inheritances. It was said that a man might lose his camels and tents, but not his books, for books fed the mind, and the mind guided the journey. Desert poets and memory masters in cultures. With limited access to physical writing, oral tradition filled the gap. Poetry, riddles, parables, these were stored in memory, passed from elders to youth with meticulous accuracy. Among the Tuareg, the Fulani, and other Saharan peoples, poets were revered. They composed epic verses, often extemporaneously, about love, loss, bravery, and the stars. A single evening around a fire could stretch into a night of poetic debate, each participant recalling thousands of lines. Some elders knew entire genealogies by heart, stretching back 50 or more generations. Each name and relation recited without error. Women and knowledge, though often unrecorded in texts, women played a critical role in preserving desert knowledge. In places like Timbuktu, it was not uncommon for mothers to teach their children to read. In nomadic societies, women acted as oral historians, healers, and teachers of practical science. How to find water, track weather, navigate dunes by starlight. Women embroidered symbols of protection into clothing and tents, a form of visual literacy passed from eye to hand, from hand to heart. Modern rediscoveries, many desert libraries, especially in Mali and Mauritania, are being rediscovered and restored. Today, projects funded by international organizations now catalog and digitize manuscripts to preserve them against time, conflict, and neglect that in some towns. Ancient libraries are now museums, small, quiet places where tourists and locals alike can marvel at the endurance of ink, fiber, and thought that in others. Knowledge still rests quietly in private homes, wrapped in cloth, stored in wooden boxes, awaiting another generation of readers, listening to the dust books do not shout in the desert. They murmur. They wait in corners, buried beneath silence, pressed between heat and history. They whisper not only of gods and science, but of patience, of discipline, of thought that stretches like an endless dune, slowly shaped by wind, time, and human hands. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine a scholar under a flickering lantern, copying a line slowly, lovingly, as if the very act of writing were a prayer. Hear the page turn in the stillness. See the ink glisten faintly, and know that even in the vast emptiness, minds moved, and in their movement, left behind a trail as lasting as any caravan route. In the heart of the desert, where water was precious and shade a rare blessing, survival took shape not only in the form of food and shelter, but in the movement of hands across thread and fiber. Long before cities loomed or flags were flown, there were textiles, woven, stitched, and dyed by those who wandered through wind and sand. The story of desert life is not only told in words, but in the warp and weft of cloth, in the hum of the loom, and the rhythm of needle and hand. Fabric, for the desert-dwelling peoples, was far more than a covering. It was architecture, artistry, economy, identity, and survival rolled into one. Threads spun from camel hair, sheep's wool, or goat fibers, dyed with plants found along desert trails, and patterned with stories as old as the dunes that so let us enter a quieter chapter of history, one that does not shout, but softly rustles in the wind, one woven strand by strand under canopies of sun and starlight. The tent as home and horizon in nomadic life. The tent was a mobile house and a central symbol of existence. Not randomly stitched or hastily thrown together, the desert tent was a work of immense craft and communal memory. Black tents of goat hair, known among Bedouin peoples as Bait al-Shayar or House of Hair, were remarkably suited to desert life. The coarse goat hair swelled in humidity and tightened during rain, making the tent more waterproof. In dry conditions, it allowed a slight breeze to pass through, offering respite from heat. These tents could be taken down and packed onto camels within an hour, only to be erected again on another patch of earth by nightfall. The fabric, the poles, the ropes, all crafted and maintained by the women of the tribe, lasted years, sometimes decades, and were often passed down like family heirlooms. The role of the weaver weaving was often a communal, meditative act, done by women who learned the skill as girls. They didn't just weave material things. They wove memory and identity, each pattern telling of ancestry, geography, mood, or hope. Weaving was done on horizontal ground looms, often set up just outside tents where light was better. The weaver would kneel or sit, adjusting threads by hand, guiding shuttles of color in rhythmic movement, singing softly to herself or chatting with nearby women. The colors, earth red, ochre, indigo, charcoal, were drawn from plants, minerals, even crushed insects. Each shade held meaning. Each motif had purpose. Diamonds, zigzags, and waves stitched into cloth were not decorative flourishes. They were messages, patterns as language. A trained eye could read the rugs and cloaks of a nomad and know their tribe, their region, even their mood. A row of connected Diamonds might speak of marriage or union. Triangles pointed upward may invoke mountains or ancestors. Stylized trees could signal hope for rainfall or fertility. These were not mere accessories. A woven item was a map of belief, a flag of origin, a prayer cloth, a dowry, and a legacy all at once. To wrap oneself in such cloth was to carry a story. To gift such a piece was to offer more than warmth. It was to give memory, meaning, and time itself. Cloaks, robes, and camel covers clothing served both function and form in the desert. Long, loose robes protected from sun and wind. Head coverings such as the keffiyeh or tajul shielded the face during sandstorms and held cultural significance, folded in specific ways depending on tribe or status. Even animals wore fabric. Camels adorned with woven saddle blankets, tassels, and decorative bridles, especially during weddings or festivals. A finely adorned camel was a walking tapestry of the tribe's pride. The dyeing process color was never taken for granted. Dyes were extracted with care. Indigo was fermented in clay pots, henna leaves ground into paste, and pomegranate skins boiled for yellow and orange hues. Some colors required weeks of preparation, others days of soaking and drying. Dyeing was part chemistry, part ritual. Often done in small batches, it required careful timing and practiced knowledge passed from mother to daughter in some communities. Dyeing was done in spring, when water was more abundant and heat helped the drying process. Children helped gather leaves. Elders inspected the hues. Each dyed skein of yarn was a promise of something soon to be made. Portable artistry. The beauty of nomadic textile culture was its portability. Unlike stone carvings or immovable paintings, desert art traveled with its people. A tent, once folded and packed, carried its own aesthetic. A saddlebag bore embroidered borders. Even cradles for infants were decorated with symbolic stitching. To wander did not mean to abandon beauty. Quite the opposite, it meant bringing it along, stitched into everyday items, hidden in plain sight. Tradition into modernity. Today, many of these textile traditions persist, though modern materials and markets have altered them. Rugs from the Berber people of North Africa, Kalims from Anatolia, Sazanis from Central Asia, all trace their roots to nomadic looms. Collectors marvel at their patterns. Designers imitate their color palettes. But for the weavers, they remain acts of continuity. Even in modern cities, some desert-born artisans continue their craft, threading memory into cloth, recalling dunes from rooftops and alleyways, listening to the fabric. In this silent part of history, there are no battles to recall, no empires rising or falling. There is only a mother weaving by morning light, a daughter watching and learning, a cloth folded carefully at night, to be used for a wedding, a farewell, or a newborn's first sleep. Threads hum softly with all they've seen. They don't cry out, but they endure, and so, as sleep gently approaches, imagine lying beneath such a tent. The stars above flickering through small gaps in the fabric. The scent of spun wool and dust around you. The gentle memory of hands, long gone, that once stitched the very walls that now hold you. The desert breathes. And in its quiet, the woven world still lives. The desert has no libraries, no gilded archives with creaking wooden shelves, no bound tomes left to gather dust. Its truths are not etched in stone or preserved on parchment. Instead, they live in the mouth and memory, carried by voice, echoing. Intense beneath starlit skies, passed from parent to child as the fire dims low. In the desert, history is not read, it is heard. Among the nomadic peoples who have walked the sands of Arabia, North Africa, Central Asia, and beyond, oral tradition is not a pastime. It is civilization itself. It is the ledger of past migrations, the record of sacred laws, the binding of kinship, the map of tribal alliances, and the root of shared identity. When land is fluid, when settlements are temporary, and when writing is a luxury, Memory becomes both compass and lifeline. And so, in this quiet corner of history, we turn not to monuments or ruins, but to stories, living stories, told by those who refuse to forget. The campfire circle picture a cold desert night, the wind whispering across dunes like a mother's hush. In the center of a camp, a small fire burns low, its orange glow flickering against woolen tents and weather-worn faces. Around it sit elders, children, and travelers. The air smells of smoke and spices. Somewhere, tea boils gently in a blackened kettle. Then begins the telling, not rushed, not rehearsed. A tale woven from memory, repetition, rhythm. Perhaps it is the epic of a hero who crossed 7 deserts and found the spring of stars. Perhaps a fable where a clever fox tricks a prideful lion. Perhaps a love story sung in verse, repeated across generations like a lullaby. These stories were not written, but structured. They followed patterns of meter, rhyme, and alliteration. They included repetition, mnemonic devices, visual metaphors. The tellers were custodians of more than entertainment. They carried lineages, histories, survival strategies, and they were listened to with reverence, as though the past itself sat among them. Poets of the sand in many nomadic cultures, the poet held power equal to a warrior or leader. Among the pre-Islamic Bedouins, a shair, a tribal poet, was not just a bard. He or she was a diplomat, a satirist, a record keeper. Poets could insult enemies, praise ancestors, recall victories, and weave spells with syllables. To have a great poet in your tribe was a mark of honor. To be shamed by one, a lasting wound. Verses traveled faster than caravans. A single couplet, skillfully spoken, could preserve a moment for centuries. Even today, in the dunes of Mauritania or the highlands of Iran, nomads recite poems while herding or resting, sometimes humming fragments older than any book. Proverbs. In the wind, while epics and poems shaped long memory, proverbs shaped daily life. Desert speech is rich in short, vivid expressions, sayings that condense lifetimes of wisdom into a single breath. He who owns the water owns the time. The camel does not see its own hump. The sand may shift, but the sun never. Lies. These were not decorations of speech, but tools, ways to teach, to correct, to warn, to comfort. A nomadic child could learn how to survive a drought, navigate a trade dispute, or honor an elder all through a few well-worn phrases. Memory as map where cartographers drew borders, nomads traced stories. A dune was not just a rise of sand. It was where a great-grandfather camped during a locust year. A rocky outcrop was where lovers once met. A salt plain was crossed by a prophet's horse. The world was mapped in memory, in narrative, in shared remembrance. This made the nomadic world intimate, relational. One did not need a compass when the landscape was full of remembered names. Direction was guided by lineage. Space was sacred because it was storied. The women's stories in tents, especially among women, stories served other purposes. They were tools of survival and social bonding. Mothers told tales while weaving or grinding grain. Some passed on riddles and humorous yarns meant to teach children cleverness. Others recited more solemn tales, cautionary stories of betrayal, honor, resilience. Many of these stories were rarely heard by outsiders. They traveled across generations not by books, but by habit, told during labor, nursing, or mourning. In their quiet repetition, entire lineages of thought and emotion were preserved. Song and shadow sometimes. Stories came with instruments. A rebab played slowly beneath a lament. A frame drum tapped during a wedding chant. Hands clapped rhythmically, while shepherds sang to passing stars. Songs remembered migrations, loves, losses, and moments of laughter around old fires. Even dances, spirals in the sand, slow shuffles by moonlight, told stories. Movement was a kind of language, gestures echoing moments when words were not enough. The archive of breathing a world obsessed with written records. The oral traditions of desert peoples might seem ephemeral, but they endure, stronger in some ways than ink. Where libraries burn and paper fades, the spoken word lives on, revived each time it is shared. The desert is not silent. It hums with memory. And as the winds sweep dunes into new shapes, the stories adjust, but do not vanish. They remain within the people, as constant as the sun. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself in that circle by the fire. Listen to a voice you do not know, telling a tale you feel you've heard before. Let it carry you across centuries, across dunes, across dreams. For here in the hush of night, in the warmth of story, the desert speaks and remembers. In the vast and blinding openness of the desert, where the land seems to stretch endlessly and the sky bears down with an eternal hush, the oasis is a miracle, a quiet defiance, a whisper of green in an ocean of gold. To those who wander through sand and solitude, the oasis is more than just water. It is life made visible, a promise kept by the earth in its harshest form. Long before cities emerged and long after some had crumbled to sand, oases have been the secret heart of desert civilizations. Not static places, but vibrant centers of seasonal rhythm, cultural exchange, and subtle human engineering. They were the lungs of nomadic life, breathing sustenance into routes otherwise marked by thirst and silence. To understand desert civilizations, one must understand the oasis, not just as a source of water, but as a node of knowledge, a threshold between movement and stillness, between wilderness and cultivation. The hidden wellsprings. Most oases are born from hidden aquifers, underground rivers that flow beneath ancient strata, gathering meltwater from distant mountains or rainfall from forgotten epochs. In places where the crust dips or fractures, the water reaches the surface, bubbling up as springs or soaking into low-lying ground. What results is not a lake, but something smaller, humbler, and often more carefully tended. Ancient desert dwellers learned how to read the signs: a slight green shimmer on the horizon, a cluster of palms rising like fingers in prayer, the scent of moisture carried faintly on the breeze. And when they found it, they stayed, not forever, but long enough to plant, rest, and exchanged at a tapestry of trees and shadows. The oasis is rarely large. It does not stretch wide or deep, but it is layered, vertical, and rhythmic. The classic structure is a three-story garden, date palms towering above, creating a canopy that softens the sun. Beneath them, fig trees, pomegranates, or olives. And below, rows of beans, barley, or herbs, growing in the shaded coolness of loam enriched by centuries of composting and care. Water is guided not by chance, but by channel, through canets or fogaras, ancient underground tunnels carved by hand, to bring water from distant springs with minimal evaporation. These were not simple ditches, but feats of mathematical and communal engineering, often passing through rock and gravel for miles before they surfaced. Oases required patience and cooperation. Every drop mattered. Every plot of land had a history, a right, a lineage. Disputes over irrigation were settled by elders, not in courts, but in gatherings beneath the shade, where memory and law intertwined. Cultures in bloom oases were never just farms. They were way stations, markets, and meeting points. Here, nomads met settled folk, and trade blossomed like the apricot trees that lined the terraces. The oasis was where news traveled faster than the wind, where a rare herb from India might be swapped for salt from the Sahara, where a traveler from far-off Samarkand might share a song with a herder from the Atlas Mountains. In some oases, such as Siwa in Egypt or Al-Asa in Arabia, whole towns grew. Mosques, libraries, hammams, and caravanserais rose from the earth like mirages made real. These were not mere stops, they were destinations. The people who lived there spoke multiple languages, balanced between nomadic traditions and urban architecture, and held histories that spanned centuries of isolation and contact out of fragile balance. And yet, for all their abundance, oases were vulnerable. A clogged cannet, an overgrazed patch, a few dry seasons, and life could collapse back into desert. Sustainability wasn't a slogan but a necessity, practiced intuitively through methods now being rediscovered by modern environmental science. Crop rotation, water sharing rituals, and seasonal migration patterns all played a role. Animals grazed on the outskirts, never at the center. Waste became compost. Trees were pruned not for yield, but for shade. And time was measured not in hours, but in harvests and returns. Sound and silence at dawn. The oasis was filled with sound. The bray of donkeys, the clatter of wooden wheels, the low murmur of prayers, and the high-pitched laughter of children, playing barefoot in sand-worn alleys. But by midday, silence reclaimed the streets. People retreated to shaded rooms, water jars cooled in stone niches, and time slowed. In the evenings, music returned, flutes, drums, strings. Women pounded grain in large mortars, their rhythms echoing like heartbeats beneath the stars. Men discussed the day's trade or debated ancient poetry while sipping tea sweetened with desert mint. In the nomads' memory to the nomadic tribes, the oasis was more than respite. It was ritual, a place remembered through generations. Some were visited annually, marked by tribal calendars and ancestral routes. Others were stumbled upon in emergencies, prayed for, and blessed. Many nomads buried their dead near oases, believing the soul, like the caravan, needed water and rest on its journey. These graveyards, half buried in sand, now whisper of those who crossed the deserts on camelback and faith alone. That today's echoes modernity has changed many oases. Some have turned into tourist attractions, with electric pumps replacing cannons, and date palms lit by LED strings at night. Others have vanished, choked by salt or drained by overuse. But still, in remote regions, the ancient balance holds. Somewhere, a boy is climbing a palm to collect ripe dates. A woman is pouring water into a clay jar, cool against the heat. A man is tracing a water line with a stick, adjusting a stone to let the current pass. The cycle continues, and in our imagination, too, the oasis lives, green against the memory of gold, calm within the wild. When we dream of escape, of peace, of shade and silence, it is the oasis we see, not the opulence of cities, but the quiet abundance of something small, precious, and perfectly timed. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, imagine the distant rustle of palm leaves, the cool breath of a desert spring, the low hum of insects. In twilight, let the oasis surround you. Let it teach you to rest, to breathe, and to bloom quietly, exactly where you are. In the hushed golden hours between the heat of the afternoon and the chill of evening, the desert becomes a different place. Shadows stretch long across rippling dunes, the sand cooling slowly beneath foot and hoof, and the whispering wind carries with it stories of countless travelers. Here, in this expanse of shifting dust and time, we find the ancient caravans, endless lines of movement winding through what may appear to be a barren void, but what was, in truth, one of the greatest networks of trade, knowledge, and connection the ancient world ever knew. The caravan was not merely a procession of beasts and burdens, nor just a means of transporting silk, spice, salt, and gold. It was a culture unto itself, a breathing, moving organism composed of human determination, animal endurance, and the profound silence of the sands. Long before the whistle of steam engines or the roar of diesel trucks, there was the soft pad of camel feet, the creaking of wooden saddles, and the rhythmic jangle of bronze bells tied to leather harnesses. These caravans were the lifeblood of early desert civilizations. Long-distance trade, perhaps as old as settled civilization itself, reached deep into the sands. From the ancient kingdoms of Nubia and Kush, through the Egyptian deserts, the Maghreb, Arabia, Persia, and into Central Asia, these silent trails spanned continents. The Sahara, the Rub al Khali, the Kizilkum, and the Gobi, each desert bore witness to thousands of these slow-moving symphonies of trade. The camel, known poetically as the ship of the desert, made it all possible. Domesticated sometime in the 3rd millennium BCE, camels were not only valued for their strength and endurance, but for their ability to survive where other pack animals simply could not. A camel could carry up to 600 pounds, survive for days without water, and navigate sands with padded feet and a resistance to heat that bordered on miraculous. There were two types: the one-humped dromedary of Arabia and the two-humped Bactrian of Central Asia, each suited to different terrain, yet equally essential. The caravans they led were immense. Historical records and oral traditions alike speak of processions that stretched for miles, numbering hundreds or even thousands of camels, each loaded with bolts of cloth, jars of incense, blocks of salt, amphorae of oil, bundles of dried fruit, and sacks of gold dust. With them came people, traders, guides, guards, scribes, cooks, and servants. There were stories and songs, quiet prayers uttered under the starlit sky, and the eternal battle against the wind, the heat, and the uncertainty of the sands. But the desert was never empty. It held way stations, oases tucked beneath palm trees, where water shimmered like glass and date palms stood as sentinels of life. There were cities that thrived solely because of the caravans: Petra, Palmyra, Timbuktu, and Gao. These cities were not mirages, but real hubs of culture, learning, and diplomacy. Here, languages intertwined, currencies changed hands, and philosophies were exchanged along with goods. In this sense, the caravan was a river, and the desert was its bed. Along its length, ideas flowed. It was through these routes that paper moved from China to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. It was via the camel routes that mathematics, medicine, and astronomy traveled. It was in the shade of tents pitched beside watering holes that merchants from India and Persia shared stories with Berber traders and Arab poets. And it was slow, deliberately, necessarily slow. One cannot rush across the desert. The sun punishes the impatient. The wind confounds those who charge ahead. And so the caravan learned the rhythm of the land, moving with a pace set not by ambition, but by endurance, by wisdom, and by the quiet understanding that to survive is to flow, not to force. The desert, in return, shaped those who crossed it. Caravanners developed a remarkable intuition, reading the stars, the dunes, the wind itself. They learned to travel at night, led by constellations and instinct. They formed complex kinship networks, alliances with nomadic tribes, and a deep respect for the environment that bore them forward. Among these caravans, certain names became legendary. The Tuareg of the Central Sahara, draped in indigo veils, knew the sands better than any map could describe. The Nabateans, skilled in desert trade, built Petra into a jewel of the sand. The Arab tribes of the Hijaz and Najd carried goods and the Quran across vast distances, blending commerce with culture. And in Central Asia, the Sogdians were masters of the Silk Road, polyglot traders who moved seamlessly between empires. There, caravans laden with silk, lapis lazuli, and faith. There were dangers, of course: bandits, sandstorms, mirages, and sometimes even rebellion within the caravan itself. But the reward was survival, profit, and often glory. Some merchants grew wealthy enough to sponsor mosques, libraries, and schools. Others gave up trade altogether to become scholars, mystics, or diplomats, their lives transformed by the long hours of contemplation under the open sky. To sleep now, imagining these processions, is to feel the warmth of a shared blanket under stars, the glow of a fire kept low to avoid attention, the sound of a camel's contented groan as it settles into the sand. It is to dream of a place where time stretches, where urgency vanishes, and where each footstep is part of a grand, ancient story. As you breathe slowly, let the caravan pass by. Let the bell's faint chime mark the rhythm of your breath. Let the desert, vast and eternal, carry you into gentle sleep, one step at a time. In the hush of the ancient world, long before cities rose and kingdoms crumbled, there were the deserts. Vast and seemingly empty, they stretched beneath the boundless dome of sky, their dunes shifting quietly with the wind, their heat shimmering like a mirage over timeless ground. But even in these seemingly barren lands, life stirred. Not loudly, not in the manner of bustling ports or stone-walled capitals, but gently, rhythmically, like the slow beat of a heart attuned to the cycles of the sun and stars. I end this first step of our quiet journey. We turn our attention to the birthplaces of nomadic life, the early deserts where human beings first began to understand how to live with, rather than against, the earth's dry breath. These places, the Sahara, before it was fully a desert, the Iranian plateau, the broad steppes of Central Asia, were once greener, more generous with their waters. But change, ever so gradual, crept in like the wind that shapes the dunes. As climates shifted, rivers withdrew. Lakes turned shallow, and grasses crisped under a sun that no longer shared as many clouds. But humans stayed. They watched. They learned. Some moved toward the rivers. Yes, toward the Nile, the Tigris, the industry. But others turned toward the open spaces. They became wanderers, shepherds, riders, traders, people who understood the value of a tent more than a wall, of a path more than a road. Nomadism was not born out of chaos, but of choice, resilience, and rhythm. Early desert dwellers did not flee the land's silence. They embraced it. Their homes were made of woven goat hair, lightweight yet warm, and their flocks moved with them, feeding on what the land offered. They followed the rains, the stars, the subtle signals of animals and plants. Their maps were not drawn on parchment, but in memory and song. We can imagine them now, not in glorious battle or bustling marketplaces, but in the still hours of the early morning, as a fire is kindled with practiced care and a kettle hisses softly with water drawn from yesterday's well. A child's yawn breaks the hush. A camel shifts and bellows in protest to the cold. A mother smooths sand from a sleeping mat, her hands knowing the feel of both fabric and earth. These were the first desert dwellers, not yet the famed Bedouins, Mongols, or Tuareg, but their ancestors in spirit. They left few ruins, few stone markers of their passing, yet their ways echo into the present. Their memory lives in oral poetry, in patterns woven into carpets, in songs sung beneath the stars. The desert, in its quiet way, preserves these traces. Not like a museum, where glass boxes hold dead artifacts, but like a story told slowly, by the winds, by the heat, by the plants that bloom once a year and vanish by noon. Even the term desert misleads. It suggests a place deserted, abandoned, lifeless. But the ancients knew better. These lands bloomed, not constantly, but deeply. Their flowers were fleeting but brilliant. Their waters rare, but pure. Their people few, but wise in the ways of the earth's austerity. They learned to read footprints in dust, to find shade where none seemed to exist, to follow clouds like omens and find water by watching birds. They learned that survival was not conquest, but coexistence. Not mastery, but balance. To end this first segment, As you drift into rest, let the sands of time sift gently through your thoughts. Picture the slow ripple of a dune caught in the golden light of dawn, a lone figure, leading a camel along a ridge. The only sound the soft crunch of sand beneath padded feet. Hear the flap of tent cloth in a breeze, the quiet murmur of voices sharing stories passed down through centuries. Here, in the whispering sands of origin, history begins not with a bang, but with a breath, dry, warm, ancient. Close your eyes. The fire is low. The stars are out. The desert is not empty. It is listening. Where does life begin in the desert? Not with the sun, nor with the sand, but with water. In places where rain may come only once a year and rivers dry into memory, water is not simply a resource. It is a story, a rhythm, a god. In this second part of our slow, quiet journey through deserts and nomadic paths, we pause to listen to the long, low heartbeat of the desert. A heartbeat made not of drums or hooves, but of the slow movement of water beneath the surface. It is easy, at first glance, to think of deserts as dry places, and they are. But beneath the shifting sands and cracked clay, ancient rivers still sleep. These are called fossil aquifers, great underground basins of water, stored for thousands, even millions of years. Nomads may not have known the geological terms, but they understood the signs, the patterns of grass, the behavior of animals, the way certain birds circled in the sky when something stirred below. Oases, the bright gems of desert travel, were more than rest stops. They were worlds in miniature, places of palms and springs, where date trees grew tall and shade wrapped around the weary like a blanket. Camels knelt gratefully in the cool dust. Children laughed near the water's edge. Traders washed off the crust of the road and shared figs and news. In the quiet stillness, these places seemed like miracles, but they were carefully kept. The balance between use and respect was as fine as the edge of a flint knife. The desert people. Water was sacred not because it was rare, but because it reminded them that even in hardship, life persisted. They sang to it. They built their travel routes around it. In time, whole caravan cities rose near springs. Not cities in the sense of great towers or walls, but knots of trade and culture where ideas, fabrics, and spices passed between hands and languages. These were places like Timbuktu, Kashgar, and Siwa, names that now sound like legends, but were once lived in, breathed in, slept in. Nomads understood water in ways that modern cities often forget. They collected dew. They shaded their storage. They dug shallow wells and knew when to let them rest. Their survival was a dance with scarcity, never demanding more than the desert could offer, never wasting the gift of a single drop. And in this way, they taught their children not just how to find water, but how to feel gratitude for it, how to look at a spring and feel joy deeper than any feast. Close your eyes, if they aren't already. Picture a narrow trail between dunes, a quiet line of camels walking beneath the stars. The stars themselves seem closer in the desert, sharper, cleaner, more certain. The air is cool. A small group stops, and the sound of water trickling into a goatskin pouch is heard. That sound, in the silence of the desert, is the sound of life. Not far away, an oasis ripples. The palms sway slightly, the moon casting shadows on the water's surface. A soft breeze carries the scent of distant blooms. Somewhere, a flute is played, slow and low, a lullaby not for children, but for the land itself. Here, in the second part of our story, water does not roar or gush. It whispers. It sings. And the desert listens. Let that sound carry you now. Deeper into rest, deeper into stillness. The sands shift slowly outside your tent, but within, you are wrapped in calm. Tomorrow, you may travel again. But tonight, you drink from the memory of ancient springs. In the stillness between sandstorms, In the hush of twilight by a low fire, fingers work. Not idle fingers, not bored ones. These are fingers that know a thread's path by heart, that know the rhythm of pattern like the rhythm of walking. In the lives of desert nomads, cloth is more than clothing. It is history you can wear. It is identity you can feel. It is a story you wrap yourself in when the nights are cold and when memory runs thin. This 14th segment gently unspools the threads of nomadic textile tradition, how weaving became a practice of survival, of beauty, of meaning. From tents made of goat hair to robes dyed with desert herbs. From rugs that carried the language of tribes to headdresses that told of lineage. The loom was a silent yet faithful storyteller. Let us follow the fibers, strand by strand, through silence and color. The tent. Home on the move home that moves must be light, flexible, and strong. For nomads, the tent was a sacred structure. It was born not from architecture, but from animal and hand. The tent's fabric came from goat hair, shorn, cleaned, spun, and woven into thick panels that breathed in the day and insulated in the night. Among the Bedouin, these tents were called Beit al-Shayar, houses of hair. The goat hair swelled in humidity and tightened in rain, making the tent waterproof without tools. These black tents, divided inside between male and female space by curtains, became central to daily life. The tent was stitched by the women, inherited through generations, patched and repaired like a living thing. It wasn't just shelter, it was kin. And when the family moved, the tent folded up like a story in a book, ready to be read again. The loom is memory keeper in many desert communities. Looms were portable, a simple wooden frame bound with string and weighted with stones. The act of weaving often began at a young age. Mothers taught daughters to spin, to knot, to pull the weft across the warp with steady grace. Patterns were not written. They were remembered. Geometric shapes told of regions. Colors told of lineage. A certain knot meant the weaver's tribe. A border design hinted at migration. Rugs were not mere decoration. They were biographies on a carpet woven by a young Berber. Girl might begin with simple stripes. As she aged and moved, learned and lost, the design evolved. By the time the rug was complete, it was a tapestry of her inner and outer journeys that in Central Asia. The Turkic tribes wove with the same reverence. Their felts and carpets, shurdak, eyes, held symbolic motifs. Horns for strength, spirals for eternity, diamonds for protection. Textile as map and language unlike written alphabets. Weaving offered a different kind of literacy. Each tribe had its own motifs, and trained eyes could read a woven piece like a paragraph to an outsider. It was a colorful rug. But to those within the culture, it was a message. A marriage rug told of a new union. A mourning blanket used darker, deeper tones. A ceremonial sash might be woven only once in a lifetime. And if a tribe was displaced, their textiles carried the memory of their former land. Even colors had dialects. Red, made from madder root or crushed cochineal, spoke of passion, fertility, or bloodlines. Blue, often from indigo, could signify protection or the heavens. White was reserved for purity or mourning. Green, a sacred color in many Islamic cultures, was rarely worn, but deeply respected. The role of women as weavers of memory in many nomadic societies. Men rode, herded, and traded. Women wove. But to say weaving was a domestic chore is to misunderstand its power. The woman who wove also designed, decided, and passed on. In her fingers was the memory of her mother and the future of her daughters. In Tuareg communities, it was the women who handled indigo dyeing, so much so that their hands and faces turned a deep blue. This tint was worn with pride, a mark of skill. Among the Mongols, women felt makers shaped yurts and clothed empires. Their hands sculpted fibers into homes, shoes, and even battle armor. These weavers were not nameless. Their works were signed, if not by name, then by pattern. And their labor was visible in every thread. Clothing is statement the desert robe, flowing, loose, protective, is not a simple garment. It is designed with precision. Wide sleeves catch the breeze. Long lengths shield from sun and sand. Layers trap cool air close to the skin. For the Tuareg men, the Tajal must. A blue-faced veil and turban was both modesty and identity. It kept the sand out, the sun off, and mystery intact. Women wore silver jewelry with engraved symbols, layered over embroidered dresses that echoed tribe and ranked in the vast Gobi. Mongol robes called dio were cinched at the waist, padded for travel, and often richly decorated, especially during festivals. These clothes were not chosen at random. They were tools of climate, culture, and pride. Dyeing the desert dyes were drawn from the land. Henna, indigo, pomegranate peel, walnut, husks, saffron, turmeric. Each region had its palette. The process of dyeing was slow, boiling, soaking, drying, repeating. And it required knowledge of when to gather which plants, in which season. In some communities, dye secrets were guarded, known only to a few. Recipes were passed down like stories, whispered only at night that a particularly prized shade of blue might come only from a certain hill under a certain moon. And the colors, when done well, could last decades, even centuries. Trade and transformation textiles were not only made, they were traded. Desert routes were filled with fabrics moving from east to west, from the looms of Central Asia to the markets of Cairo and Fez. Silk mingled with wool. Camel hair met cotton. Persian patterns mixed with Moorish dyes. That to receive a foreign cloth was to receive a piece of someone else's world. These gifts, sometimes small swatches, were treasured. Women stitched them into larger tapestries, blending heritage and hope. In time, even styles transformed. African tribes borrowed symbols from Berbers. Mongol felt makers learned from Chinese silk workers. And everywhere, threads united where language could not. Weaving as survival, weaving as soul. The loom did more than create cloth. It steadied the mind. In the face of uncertainty, sandstorms, droughts, raids, the act of weaving was grounding. It gave shape to hours. It turned chaos into rhythm. Some say that the earliest weaving songs were lullabies sung to babies. Others claim they were prayers, asking the spirits to bless each thread. Regardless, the weaver's world was a quiet one, meditative, steady. And as each rug was finished, as each tent was mended, the soul felt stronger, sleep beneath the woven sky. And now, as you begin to drift into sleep, imagine being wrapped in a heavy, hand-woven desert shawl, its pattern stitched with old names and warm memories. The wind has quieted. The stars blink above. In the distance, someone hums a weaving song. You are safe in the tent of memory, beneath the roof of fabric. And moonlight, let the day's edges unravel. Let the night wrap around you like a gentle thread. In the silent breath between dunes, under stars that blink without end, there lies the unspoken rhythm of life in the desert, the search for water. It is not a frantic chase, but a slow, sacred practice. In the shifting lands where rivers vanish and clouds forget their duty, water is not merely substance. It is spirit. It is memory. It is the invisible axis around which nomadic existence turns. This 15th segment wanders deep into the desert's relationship with water. Not the crashing seas or the mighty rivers of distant lands, but the subtle veins of survival, the springs, wells, oases, and rituals that sustained entire civilizations beneath blistering skies. It is a tale not of abundance, but of reverence, ingenuity, and the quiet marvel of persistence. Let us descend now into the heart of the earth and listen, the whispering wells before maps, before satellites, before metal pipes and mechanical drills. There was knowledge passed through families, through stories, through careful observation of stars, winds, and soil. The Bedouin knew the language of the land. A certain fold in the hills, a type of vegetation, the movement of birds. These were signs that water slept beneath. Wells were dug by hand. Some stretched hundreds of feet into the earth, built stone by stone in spiraling descent. These were acts of faith and memory. Each well had a name. Each had a story. Among the Tuareg, there was a custom to never leave a well empty-handed. If one drew water, they also replenished the troughs for animals. They cleaned the edge. They marked the spot with signs for others. Water was not owned. It was shared, even among strangers that in the desert. Boweries, step wells, were carved into the earth like inverted temples. Each stairwell not only offered water but shade, coolness, and even a place for storytelling. The deeper you descended, the quieter it became, like entering a sacred cavern beneath the sun. Oases. Miracles in stillness. Oases are not accidents. They are miracles curated by centuries of care. They are places where underground aquifers kiss, the surface where palms grow, and where caravans converge. The Siwa Oasis in Egypt, the Tamia in Niger, the Gelta Diarchii in Chad. Each oasis is both refuge and crossroads. They are ecosystems in miniature: frogs, birds, insects, flowers, all gathered in joyous contrast to the dunes. But they require guardianship. Palm groves must be pruned. Water must be allocated fairly. Salt must be kept from the soil. And so, in each oasis, a delicate governance emerged. Elders, councils, shared rules passed through generations. In the Sahara, date palms were considered both crop and currency. Their roots held the soil. Their leaves shaded gardens. Their fruit fed both man and beast. And so the care of a palm was a quiet kind of prayer. Ancient hydraulics. Long before industrial pumps, desert people engineered solutions to the problem of thirst. In Persia and parts of Arabia, canets were created, underground channels that transported water from distant aquifers into settlements. These were marvels of mathematics and patience. Dug by hand, sometimes across miles, they brought cool, clean water to villages where no river had ever flowed. In North Africa, Fogaras operated on similar principles, with underground tunnels gradually inclining to preserve pressure. The openings were marked with circular stone wells, small, evenly spaced humps across the landscape. Such systems required maintenance. Whole professions emerged: caretakers, diggers, and diviners. Their work was unseen, but their importance was unmatched. Even among the Mongols, water was directed with care. Though they roamed vast steppes, they respected the fragile balance of riverbanks and springs, never polluting the source, and moving camps before exhaustion set in. The ethics of thirst. To be thirsty in the desert is to know humility. To find water is to practice generosity. Among many nomadic tribes, offering water to a stranger was not charity, it was law. The punishment for denying water could be exile or worse. It was said that the earth remembers who hoarded water and who shared it. Stories told of lost travelers rescued by a single clay jug, of animals who led humans to springs, of prophets who struck the ground with staffs and made water burst forth. Among the Berbers, water disputes were settled not with violence, but with gatherings. Elders from neighboring clans would meet beneath trees to negotiate, redistribute, and maintain peace. Water, after all, belonged to none and to all. Water in ritual and myth, even in its scarcity, or perhaps because of it, water held a sacred place in nomadic spiritual life. Rain was not random, it was a blessing. Its arrival marked festivals, songs, and dances. People would stand with faces lifted, mouths open, allowing the sky's tears to touch them directly. Among the Kazakhs, when a child was born, a few drops of clean water were sprinkled near the cradle as a sign of hope. Among the Tuareg, water was offered to ancestors before it was drunk. It was a gesture of connection, of continuity. Dreams of water were taken seriously. A dream of a flowing stream might signify a coming fortune or reunion. A dry river in a dream could mean loss. Water moved not only through land, but through the unconscious, linking waking and sleeping worlds, cisterns, clay pots, and memory. Not all water was immediate. Some had to be stored for weeks or months. Nomadic people became masters of conservation. Clay pots with narrow necks slowed evaporation. Animal skins, cured with care, became flasks that stayed cool in the heat. Cisterns were dug into rock, sealed with lime or ash, and shaded with woven reeds. Water was covered, sung over, sometimes even blessed. It wasn't just storage, it was stewardship. Children were taught from the earliest age how to carry water without spilling, how to test its purity, how to share when there wasn't enough. That to waste water in the desert was not merely foolish. It was a kind of sacrilege. Songs of springs, echoes of wells music, too, was shaped by water. Many nomadic songs referenced wells, springs, oases. Some were lullabies sung to children born during rainy seasons. Others were mourning songs for wells gone dry. A famous Tuareg poem begins, "From the depths of the dry throat, I remember the well, where once my mother sang, and the bucket met the moon." These words, like the water they describe, carry coolness through time. Sleep beside the waters, echoing now. As your eyes begin to close, imagine the hush of an ancient stepwell. You descend stone steps worn smooth by 1,000 bare feet. The air cools. You hear the soft drip of water echoing below. A breeze brushes your cheek like a whispered blessing. You dip your fingers into the pool. The water is cold, clear, and still. Let it wash away the heat of the day. Let it carry you downward into a sleep as deep and nourishing as the desert's hidden springs. If the desert is a vast, silent ocean of sand and stone, then the oases are its green, beating hearts. They are places where life gathers against all odds, where palms rise like slow-growing prayers, and where water, rare and precious, brings rest to both man and beast. For nomads, merchants, pilgrims, and wanderers alike, the sight of an oasis was more than relief. It was a promise. Some oases were small, just a single well shaded by a lone acacia tree. Others were sprawling wonders, dotted with groves of date palms, gardens, and entire settlements. A few grew into great cities, hubs where desert trade converged, cultures mingled, and stories were born. But whether humble or mighty, each one was a miracle in miniature, a defiance of the desert's relentless thirst. The science and magic of water in the desert oases are born from geology as much as from legend. Some occur where underground rivers, trapped for centuries beneath rock and sand, find a crack or fault to emerge as springs. Others are fed by seasonal floods or the careful redirection of distant mountain streams. Ancient desert peoples mastered the art of water management, digging canets and underground channels, constructing cisterns to trap rain, and learning to protect every drop from the fierce sun. Yet to those who lived far from such places, an oasis was often seen as enchanted, a realm where the desert itself softened its grip. Travelers told tales of oases that moved from place to place, vanishing when greed drew too many. Some believed the water to be guarded by spirits, whose moods determined whether the springs would flow. Life around the oasis palm groves were the most visible sign of an oasis, their tall silhouettes standing against the horizon like guardians. Beneath their shade, barley and wheat grew in neat plots, melon vines curled along the ground, and herbs filled the air with fragrance. The dates themselves were as vital as the water, food, medicine, trade commodity, and cultural symbol all at once. Camels and goats grazed on the outskirts. Children played along the edges of shallow pools. Traders unpacked their wares, laying bright cloths on the ground. At dusk, the call to prayer mingled with the rustle of fronds, and the scent of bread baking in clay ovens drifted through the Ardayan oasis was never just a pit stop. It was a meeting ground. Here, nomadic families caught up on news from far-flung relatives. Caravan leaders hired new guides. Storytellers performed for an audience of strangers and friends alike. In a place where survival was uncertain, hospitality was not optional. It was sacred. Oases as political jewels in history. To control an oasis was to control life itself. The great routes across the Sahara, the Arabian Peninsula, and Central Asia were dotted with these green jewels, and they were fiercely contested. Dynasties rose on the wealth of an oasis, taxing merchants who stopped for water, shelter, and fodder. Armies marched to seize them, not for their land, but for their lifeblood. The famous oasis of Siwa in Egypt's western desert was not only a haven for travelers, but also a place of prophecy, home to the oracle of Ammonius that even Alexander the Great sought. The Karga oasis, with its fertile fields and fortified towns, became a critical stop along ancient Egyptian trade corridors. Farther east, in the Taklamakan Desert, oases like Khotan and Kashgar were essential links on the Silk Road, each one a miniature kingdom surrounded by sand. The fragility of paradise oases, for all their resilience, were delicate ecosystems. A neglected well could collapse. Overuse of water could drain the underground reserves. Shifting sands could bury fields. Drought could strip an oasis bare in a matter of years. Nomads developed customs to protect them, rotating grazing grounds, limiting the drawing of water, and ensuring that strangers could drink without fear. But in times of scarcity, tensions flared. Wars were fought not only over the routes between oases, but over the springs themselves. Some ancient oases vanished entirely, leaving behind ghost settlements where palm trunks lay buried in dunes, their roots still clutching at dry soil. These were grim reminders that even in the desert's gentlest places, nature always held the final word. The oasis in the nomadic mind for desert peoples. The oasis was not just a place. It was an idea. It symbolized rest, survival, and reward after hardship. It was a place to wash the dust from one's face, to hear voices other than the wind, to sleep in the shade, to eat until full. Many nomadic songs celebrated the moment of first sighting. An oasis after days in the open desert. The palm trees, rising like a mirage made real, became the very image of hope. In poetry, the oasis often represented love, comfort, or a fleeting joy that must be cherished before it fades. In some cultures, it was said that the desert offered two gifts: the clarity of endless space and the sweetness of the rare green place. Without the hardship of the dunes, the beauty of the oasis would be less keenly felt. Night at the oasis. When the sun set, the oasis transformed. Lamps flickered along narrow paths between palm trunks. Musicians tuned lutes and flutes. The air cooled, and laughter replaced the quiet stillness of the day. Guests reclined on carpets, sipping sweet tea or spiced milk. The scent of roasting lamb mingled with the perfume of night-blooming flowers. A storyteller might begin a tale about a hero who wandered for years before finding the one spring that would grant him eternal peace. Somewhere in the darkness, the quiet plash of water reminded everyone why they were here. And for those preparing to leave at dawn, the night at the oasis was both a comfort and a farewell, a reminder that in the desert, every green place is temporary, drifting into sleep in the green heart as your mind drifts now. Imagine lying beneath a canopy of palms, their fronds swaying gently in the night breeze. The stars gleam above, but here in the oasis, the air smells of earth, not dust. Somewhere nearby, a stream trickles softly. You hear the hum of low conversation, the shuffle of a camel settling down, the pluck of a stringed instrument. You close your eyes, and the desert is far away. For this moment, there is only shade, water, and the deep, slow breath of life. Sleep, knowing the oasis will hold you until morning. In the golden silence of the desert, where permanence is a mirage and only the stars remain unchanged, there exists one of humankind's most enduring marvels, the nomad's tent. It is not a home in the usual sense, rooted and fixed, but rather a foldable world, a shelter that moves with the seasons, a place where children are born, elders pass on, and the wind always finds a way in. It is modest in appearance yet immense in meaning, stitched together from threads of heritage, survival, and story. Step quietly inside a nomad's tent, whether pitched among the dunes of Arabia, the steppe grasses of Central Asia, or the stony flats of the Maghreb, and you enter a space that breathes with memory. Goat hair and will have been spun into its walls by the hands of generations, and its structure is more than shelter. It is a symbol of identity. Each knot in the rope, each pole driven into the ground, affirms a relationship with the land, not as owner, but as participant in its rhythms. The nomad's tent is easily dismantled and carried, yet never discarded. It has seen more places than most cities and held more history than many castles. It is a microcosm of civilization, neatly rolled and unrolled with the seasons. The architecture of impermanence constructed from humble materials, the tent is a marvel of utility. The Bedouin Bait al-Shawayar, house of hair, is made of black goat hair panels that breathe in the heat and resist rain when it falls. The yurts of the Central Asian steppes, domed and circular, use a wooden frame of latticework and felt insulation, keeping warmth inside during snowbound winters and coolness in blazing summers. Every nomadic tent, from the Sami Lavu to the Tuareg Ekali, is shaped by its environment. But beyond climate adaptation, they serve another purpose: portability. Life on the move demands that home be light and flexible. A family can pitch its dwelling by twilight and take it down at dawn with the grace of practiced ritual, and yet, these impermanent homes carry permanent memories. Wedding songs sung beneath their canopies echo even when the tent has moved on. The scent of meals lingers in the fabric, and the stories whispered by firelight cling to the fibers. A circle of life within the tent. Space is sacred and intentional. The interior is not divided by walls, but by meaning. There are sides for men and for women, places for guests, for storage, for sleeping, for weaving. In some cultures, the hearth sits at the center, a small flame in the middle of the world, while in others, cooking is done just outside, where the smoke can slip up to the sky. The walls might be lined with rugs and family heirlooms, silver, ornaments passed down for generations, prayer beads, musical instruments, leather bags filled with dried herbs. A small niche may hold a copy of a holy book, its pages wrapped in cloth and reverence. Children learn the arts of hospitality here: how to pour tea just so, how to speak with respect, how to listen, and always there is room for guests. In the desert, to turn away a stranger is to turn away life itself. The tent is a beacon, not a fortress. It is open to the road, to the stars, to those in need. Matriarchs of the mobile world often, it is the women of nomadic societies who construct the tents, weaving the panels, tying the ropes, knowing each stitch like a story. The making of a tent is not merely domestic labor. It is cultural continuity. Mothers pass techniques to daughters: how to choose the best wool, how to balance the frame against the wind, how to care for the old pieces so they last. In some tribes, the tent even belongs to the woman, inherited, maintained, and expanded by her hands. It is the space she commands, the world she shapes. In marriage, it is the bride's tent that becomes the new family's dwelling, traveling with them as life unfolds. Songs, shadows, and the passing wind at night, the tent becomes a cradle of sound. The wind may moan outside, sifting sand across the ropes, but inside, there is laughter, the drone of a lullaby, the whisper of old tales. Grandfathers speak of long-lost caravans. Mothers hum while weaving. A youth tunes a single-stringed instrument, and the flickering fire casts shadows that dance across the cloth. These are not the cold silences of empty rooms. This is warmth shared. This is culture unfolding without need for walls or written records. The tent is archive and theater, temple, and school. Symbolism in cloth and cord for many nomadic peoples. The tent is more than shelter. It is symbolic. The black goat hair tents of the Bedouins blend into the desert, a part of the landscape rather than a break from it. Yurts are sometimes painted or embroidered with motifs of sun, moon, and mountain, tying the family's path to the heavens above. In Persian poetry, the tent often symbolizes the transient nature of life. The world itself is a temporary camp, say the sages, and we are all travelers moving from one station to the next. The cords of the tent, then, are the bonds we form. The poles, our values, the fabric, our memories. And just as every tent must one day be taken down, so must each life return to the earth. In the language of the desert and in many nomadic tongues, the word for tent is close to the word for life, or home, or soul. This is no accident. The tent is not just the background for existence. It is existence, compact and complete. Its mobility mirrors the journeying of the spirit. Its fragility reflects the uncertainty of every tomorrow. That a city may boast its permanence, but a tent accepts change. It embraces the wind and learns to bend with it. It folds neatly when the time comes. And in that grace lies wisdom. Lulled by wind and wool now. As you lie still and breathe slowly, imagine the quiet inside a nomad's tent. The fabric sways with the wind's breath. Outside, a camel murmurs in sleep. Somewhere in the dark, a flute plays a drifting tune. The stars are visible through a flap in the cloth roof. The sand holds its warmth. This is not an unfamiliar place. Even if you've never been here, it is a place your ancestors might have known. A place where dreams are passed down like heirlooms, and where every night's sleep is a return to the road. Let your thoughts settle like dust at the end of the journey. The world outside can wait. You are home. You are held by hands older than time.